Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the bill.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I rise today in opposition to this legislation, which really poses a significant challenge for rural Virginia, particularly like those localities that I represent, where our communities are already struggling with population decline, economic stagnation, and housing affordability issues. This bill is yet another example of a one-size-fits-all policy that fails to recognize the realities of rural Virginia. So let me be clear. The legislation will disproportionately harm the very communities that are already fighting to survive. 4 of the 6 counties that I represent in the last census actually lost population. We're not seeing an influx of new residents looking for housing. We're seeing families leave. We're seeing families broken with our children leaving to find jobs, where 76% of the workforce in these 6 counties actually drives out of the district to work every day, leaving a workforce behind that has some of the lowest wages in the state, between 9 to 5. So I ask, how does forcing rural localities in our communities to increase housing stock by 1.5% annually when there aren't enough jobs to support these homes? The legislation assumes that if we just build more housing, the people will come, but it doesn't work like that. In my district, there are only 38, now think about this for a second, 38 private sector employers in 6 counties with 50 or more people. 50 or more employees, excuse me. Without job growth, new housing developments will not be sustainable. Housing demand is not driven by zoning policy, it's driven by economic opportunity. Yet instead of helping us attract businesses, this bill pushes policies designed for high-density, high-growth urban areas, policies that simply do not work in communities struggling to create jobs. It also fails to acknowledge the real housing challenges my district faces. In one locality alone, 27% of the homes there are vacation homes. So the urban residents come in, driving up the cost of housing and homes in our locality, where we have over 50% of our kids on free and reduced lunch. It just doesn't fit. So let's be honest. This bill was written with urban and suburban areas in mind, not rural Virginia. It pushes strategies that possibly make sense in cities, but are completely impractical for small towns and our rural localities. Rezoning for multifamily housing, eliminating off-street parking requirements, increasing density near transit hubs, that's not rural Virginia. So perhaps the most concerning part of this legislation, that it strips away local control. If locality fails to meet its arbitrary housing target, a housing approval board, a centralized, unelected body, will have the power to override local zoning decisions. This means bureaucrats will have the final say in what gets built in our communities, not the people who actually live there. This is a perfect example of really a disconnect and not coming together to solve the problem for each and every one of us, where urban policymakers and rural policymakers should come together to solve the problem. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to reject this top-down approach and stand with rural Virginia. Let's pass legislation that respects local control, prioritizes economic sustainability, and acknowledges that urban solutions don't always work for rural communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.